Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. David, Joe, it's a pleasure to have you guys back on the show. We got a lot of catching up to do. I don't think I've ever had you two on together. Usually it's been a giant group panel, but it's nice to just speak to both of you guys. David?
Yes.
How's it
I'm
going?
here.
How's it going?
Good, great.
How was the conference? You had a giant event come up.
Well, it was eventful, I'd say. I think on most of the feedback on it was positive. I think it was kind of a renewal thing, because people really hadn't been able to. Really, the first conference in Dallas since 2019 was a pandemic, and folks that usually go to those things annually got an opportunity to do that. And we had a good tight speaker lineup. A lot of folks really enjoyed the presentations as they were. We had good speakers. I just think it felt like it went surprisingly well. There's some of those times you can have these things and they fall behind, or you have some speakers that may rub the people the wrong way. You run into these things. That folks that have disagreements about things, but all in all, I think it went really smooth. I am obviously looking forward to probably doing something again in the 60th anniversary coming up in Dallas next year. And we, frankly, a little bit different grouping, but we're looking seriously at doing something in Memphis in April with the King Memorial site in Memphis, Tennessee, kind of having an event that's still geared towards the political assassinations of the 1960s with maybe a little more of a King emphasis. Looking forward to doing that in April 13th through 16th. That's not a 100% deal yet. I'd say it's about a 90% deal. We're still working on it, but
well, are you getting a bigger turnout each year, like compared to the 2019 conference that you guys had?
Not quite as big, but we lost some people. Frankly, the audience that goes to these things, older audience, some people passed on, to some of the folks that had been there. But I think we ended up with 83 people live, another 20 plus speakers. So we had over 100 people there at the event, another 20 plus on Zoom. So we felt like it was a success. I think we can do better when we come back to Dallas for the 60th, being the first one back. We worked really hard to get an audience there. And, still some folks are real reticent about flying still, understandable, and still working on it. So we feel like we're in a position to maybe have something good going on this year, I think.
What about the public curiosity aspect, like the people that showed up? What type, did they have any certain direction of questions? Did you see a kind of a wide scale? I mean, did you guys show any new documentation or any new evidence on things?
Well, I definitely. I mean, we had I did some presentations on the recently declassified files. Larry Rivera did. Larry also, we had him. He had done a lot of research on the Malcolm X story, which was something we introduced into the equation for the first time because of, I am not an expert on the story, but Larry had done a lot of research. Obviously, in the past year, the couple of the gentlemen that were put in jail for a number of years for the murder of Malcolm X, the judge recently ruled that they were innocent. So here we go. We've got another 60s political assassination that's basically up in the air in terms of its situation and its place. Uh, Ryan Jones, who was from the King Memorial site, gave an excellent presentation. I think the interesting thing that came out of that was that, and again, we're going to collaborate with him in Memphis. He pointed out to me that the King Memorial site is actually, how did he put it, changing their position on what happened in Memphis. In past years, you could probably, I've been there. I don't think I've ever actually, I've been to the Lorraine Motel a couple times, and I know the story very well. I have not actually taken the tour there, but I think it was similar to the sixth floor, maybe, in terms of it's sticking to the official line. But I think Ryan has kind of postured this thing and brought out things that they're going to start to take a position that's, I think, towards conspiracy about what happened to Martin Luther King, which is pretty good. I mean, I did see something on Twitter from the King Memorial Museum released something about it was the anniversary of the
Jowers trial.
Of the civil suit against Lloyd Bowers, Lloyd Jowers, that the King family won. That alone is telling me that, hey, they're tuned into this situation. So we really think that's a kind of a new development that's going to, be possibly eye-opening for us in the coming years, and as far as King is concerned. Of course, everybody's waiting for what's going to happen with here. You guys probably know the press conference that Jefferson Morley had, and we've talked a lot about the new documents. I've talked about a lot of the new documents that have been released up to this point, but we're all really anticipating, well, what are we going to see this time around? Will we see the rest of it? Larry Schnapp, obviously a lawyer, was actually involved with that press conference and involved with the lawsuit, spoke at the conference a bit and kind of updated us as well about where that's at. Ed Tatro gave an excellent keynote speech, and he's looking at some things he feels like are really important with the TFX fighter scandal situation down in Texas, and how that might have played into the whole situation in Dallas. Everybody's had a different spin. I think Casey Quinlan and Leslie Sharp, Alan Kent, who's, by those last two people, have never spoken before really in public about anything. We kind of got them to agree to be on a panel discussion about Albarelli's book, Coup in Dallas. Joey, I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? And
I'm familiar with it.
I think some folks are really, I've read parts of the book. I mean, it's very kind of an encoded, complicated scenario about a CIA agent who potentially had inside knowledge and wrote in his diaries, so to speak, about a series of events leading up to Dallas. And so that was covered. So again, we had a number of speakers. We had veteran speakers that have been around before, like Robert Groden. We tried to cover the RFK assassination a little bit, kind of did an RFK 101 thing with Dave Knight. Dave introduced some new stuff that he's been looking at on Jimmy Hoffa. I look forward to some more on that. He might do again in Memphis. So these are just kind of some things off the top of my head, but I wouldn't say that there was some explosive new piece of information no one's ever heard of before was brought forth. No, but I think a lot of the audience was educated a lot. The story was advanced on several fronts, and we just talk about trying to keep moving forward, trying to get more information, trying to educate the public about what happened in Dallas and what happened in Memphis and what happened in LA, and hope somebody's out there listening to us, you know.
Would
I
you,
mean,
well, would you agree with maybe the method I've been trying to do, which is just trying to show people other events in history that have incorporated, like if you ask more people about the Martin Luther King assassination, you say there's conspiracy involved in it. I guarantee you more people will say that there was, just because social things that have happened in our society based on a certain race. I mean, COINTELPRO and other aspects of that sort. But even then, do people know the full thing of COINTELPRO? For me, I got interested in the Fred Hampton assassination. I had Jeffrey Haas on here, and I had Greg Saccone, who made the master list of witnesses in the JFK assassination, but he also studies the Fred Hampton assassination. And you start seeing a bunch of things like a charge of stealing ice cream, like just trying to put them away. Was that a message? Like, hey, like look at the rest of the Black Panthers that were in prison for maybe trumped up charges. And it's like, so more people would probably get in line with that Martin Luther King was definitely a conspiracy with his assassination. The big one is like the JFK one. Like just recently I was talking about, I had Thunheim on here, I had Blakey on here, and I was like, I got Blakey to say, and I asked Blakey 6-7 times if Oswald was intelligence. He answered yeah, and then he would go off into something, and people were like, well, he was just answering your question. I was like, let me give you an example. If I call you racist, you go yeah, and then you start speculating all the ways that you're racist. That didn't make sense. So I was like, whatever they want to believe, whenever Blakey said that. The next, I think it was recently, it was Newsweek or someone posted an article saying Oswald might have been intelligence. And the guy that I told this before a month prior came in and goes, do me a favor and write your show down on a piece of paper. I want to get it before I leave. And I go, wait, now you believe me because like Tucker Carlson or Newsweek says something about it. So
yeah, they want some validation. Yeah, I did see that Tucker Carlson interview of, not that I like to watch Tucker Carlson, but I did make a point of watching his interview with Posner. And to Carlson's credit, he kind of just forced Posner to address the idea that Oswald was intelligence. Because he just brought it up himself. I think it's almost like, I think Posner might be, and you interviewed him. I almost think like he's taking the limited hangout approach. Now I saw that it's almost like he's anticipating something else is going to come out. I know, Joe, maybe you can elaborate on this too, because I don't know if you saw that interview, but it's like all of a sudden now it's
that came out 11 months ago.
The CIA was aware that Oswald was involved with some intelligence activities and possibly involved in the assassination, but they didn't do anything about it. So now, the story is the inability of the CIA to stop something that they knew, not that they were involved. I think that does that make sense? I think that's Posner's new limited hangout now, because I think he anticipates we're going to see some documents that directly link Oswald to the CIA. It's not that we didn't already know this, but this is going to be a validation of it. Now Posner's got to kind of modify his position a little bit. Now all of a sudden he's critical of the CIA, but not for the right reasons. I mean, that's my opinion. Joe, you got what's your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's been happening since '63. And I've described it before as concentric circles. Like they keep sort of going out and going out and going out, trying to avoid coming to the extremely obvious conclusion that somebody like Vince Salandria saw, like, immediately. And so yeah, I think that if the evidence points to, let's say there's a new document that conclusively states that, Oswald's a CIA. I mean, there is not going to be a document like that, but let's say for the sake of argument, there is. Yeah, then you have to modify your position in exactly the way David just said. You say, well, they knew about it and they were trying to monitor him, but they could, then you start making more excuses and trying to always move the goalposts every time new evidence comes by. But they've been doing that for 60 years now, almost.
I'm pretty sure I showed you guys, and I also showed Posner, but I showed the debrief of Oswald that the CIA said it wasn't a debrief. They never classified it as a debrief, but he did interview for the Central Intelligence Agency. Then it just goes, how deep does it go? I mean, I could show you guys right now a document. It's from United Press International, but it was about something that was posted in the Rolling Stones or something that they had about Oswald might have been given LSD. Now, when I mention that, people immediately assume MK Ultra. Don't even go that far. All you have to do is this. What did they give spies when they went to another country or an intelligence agent? They gave them LSD in case they were ever captured and they were interrogated, just in case. So if that is true, that shows he had intelligence connections. End of conspiracy discussion. There's a fact now. So you just kind of like, I mean, that was the hardest thing for me, was I'm trying to find things that are plausible. For instance, like you mentioned something a minute ago about just didn't make sense about Oswald. And obviously we know that they were surveilling his mail for a few years before the assassination as well, too. But this is on the Wikipedia, and I don't usually trust Wikipedia, but it agrees with the official story. So I find it funny that they put this in there. Oswald visited the Dallas FBI office about 2 to 3 weeks before the assassination, asking to see Special Agent James P. Hosty. When he was told that Hosty was unavailable, Oswald left a note that, according to the receptionist, read, "Let this be a warning. I will blow up the FBI and Dallas Police Department if you don't stop bothering my wife, Lee Harvey Oswald." Now, here's the funny part. This next sentence goes, "The note allegedly contained a threat, but accounts vary as to whether Oswald threatened to blow up the FBI or merely report this to higher authorities." I'm sorry, but the varying, that's a large scale. That's not like you gave me a Diet Coke and I asked for Coke. You gave me two different extremes there. It's like water and soda, but then it goes according
and there's no reaction. If you go into an FBI building and you tell them you're going to blow it up, you're going to go to jail.
Yeah, you're going to
jail. If Oswald really, if that's what Oswald really told him, you know, it's almost the same thing. Like if Oswald was really the, you know, the pro-Marxist whatever, how does he get it? How does he get a streamlined trip to Russia without questions asked? You know, I mean, if he really was a potential defector, how does he roll back into the United States without even being debriefed by the CIA? I mean, all those things just right.
Bringing along his Russian bride.
You know, there's no proper response to these things. And by the way, we were talking about documents, man. And the one I did come across a document, and we're you know, we'll see what's coming up here. Obviously, Morley is waiting on the 44 documents he thinks connected to Joanides. He's been on that story for a decade at least. But I did see a document was released in there when the early amounts. And I can't, I don't have him from it, escapes me. He was a lieutenant of Angleton. His name escapes me, but the Warren Commission interviewed him. And I really think it was a case that early on that he didn't know, one side didn't know what the other side was telling the Warren Commission. I think he let something out in the interview where he talked about, or admitted in effect, that Oswald was doing intelligence work in Mexico City. Now, we're debating whether Oswald was actually in Mexico City or an imposter, but the fact that somebody from the CIA suggested that Oswald was in Mexico City for intelligence, well, that blows the whole Oswald acted alone, no connections right there. I think this guy didn't know that, you know, what Helms and the rest of the boys were really what their position was with Oswald. Now, what does that mean? I mean, was Oswald, did the CIA from the highest levels promote an assassination of JFK, or was it a rogue group that once the assassination went down, that the rest of the CIA understood the connection, they understood they had to cover up? You get a lot of debate on that one. I'm not sure where you stand on it, Joe. I mean, you got folks that say, no, Helms was involved from the very top, Helms, Angleton, blah, 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 right on down. Or was this rogue operators? Like the prime suspect to me would be William Harvey. Harvey's a guy that could have done it all. He was pissed off at Kennedy's. He got exiled by the CIA after he went rogue in Cuba. I've even seen a document where Ed Lansdale was pretty much all pissed off at Harvey for getting out ahead of his skis and sending in operatives from Cuba before any invasion ever happened. So So he had all the motives, all the abilities, the ability to recruit foreign assassins. Harvey, to me, is the prime of the primest suspect in the CIA. Now he would be middle management, though. He's not the
He
top.
takes
So
orders. I would
Yeah,
prob-
well, but Bill Harvey is a really interesting cat. I mean, that guy was bad news. And you know, from the planning aspect and the mechanical aspect, like Bill Harvey is a good suspect for sure. That's a really interesting thing to go down. Now, what I would say is that the thing that points away from it being a rogue operation is that very simply the United States foreign policy changes when Kennedy is killed. And if this were a rogue operation, you wouldn't think that that would happen. In other words, everything gets into lockstep after that, you know, in a direction that Kennedy was not going in. So if this were just a small group, you'd think that there would be dynamics going in within that, and that's not what happens. The whole state changes.
yeah, and I agree with you, Joe. I take a higher position, not necessarily. I don't know about a higher position in the CIA, but I think that the whole operation, the whole plot is something that goes across the lines of power, is about power, but isn't a single entity. I think that to me, the greatest common denominator were folks that were radical right-wing extremists, anti-communist cold warriors that existed inside and outside the government, and they coalesced along the lines of what needed to be done. And I think you can't. So let's just say it was a rogue operation. Okay, it was, Harvey and his boys pulled it off. All right, hypothetically, where'd the money come from? You can't. This stuff doesn't happen. Foreign assassins don't come to the United States. Somebody has to pay them, and pay them a lot of money. So where did the money come? To me, the power involves, it's almost back to the Watergate, follow the money. And I think the money primarily came out of the place where JFK was shot at, the right-wing fanatics in Texas. I think that's where the money comes from.
Well, that's Daniel P. Sheehan's whole thing. I had Barry Jones on here talk about that. He believed that when Nixon was running against Kennedy, that he created this Operation 40, or this hit at the S team, whatever they are, and to go assassinate Castro. And he was going to use that to his advantage to help boost and get elected. And then when that didn't happen, I mean, they find this receipt in Howard Hunt's pocket or whoever when they arrest him, and it's Banco International, and then that's traced back, and that's what he was afraid of was going to come out in the Watergate thing. I mean, I think like,
well, and Nixon says when, as a very, I mean, probably the most famous thing in the transcriptions of the Watergate tapes is when they tell, I think it's John Dean is in the room. They say Hunt wants $1 million for your silence, and Nixon's immediate response is, "Yeah, I know where we can get the money." Like that is an incredible.
So I asked Jeff Shepard when he was on here, and Jeff Shepard's like the Watergate authority. And I asked him 3 times that question, if that missing tape, that piece on it was at the Kennedy assassination. He did not answer me. And I kept going back to it, and I was like, "You got to answer me." And he was like, "I don't think so." I was like, "But you mean you were on his defense team? Like you would know if there was something about any of this that had a little bit of weight to it." But I feel like it's a much easier, and my whole fight here is just getting the public in on the discussion. Despite whether everyone agrees conspiracy or who did it, who did it is like been the main focus. And I get that. I understand everyone wants to solve it, but I mean, just back to what I was saying about the Hosty thing and the whole bomb threat. It says, according to Hosty, the note said, if you have anything you want to learn about me, come talk to me directly. If you don't cease bothering my wife, I will take the appropriate action and report this to the proper authorities. So that fits the varying accounts as proper authorities. And that's Hosty saying that, who looked at the note. But it also says Agent Hosty said that he destroyed Oswald's note on orders from his superior, Gordon Shanklin. Why did you destroy a threat that could easily, I mean, it's not just like, oh, that's just a random idiot and you destroy it. It's the same thing with Secret Service members destroying documents, not only recently, but also when the AARB requested 2 documents, and then 2 weeks later, they destroyed it. I mean, so there's a lot of
things. They said,
oh,
those documents? Oh, sorry. We, yeah, all the Secret Service documents, We don't have this anymore.
I don't think you need to show people like, here's the answer and here's the answer to this. I would put it in front of them and let them go. Like, I remember I was talking to a couple of friends. They listen to a lot of the JFK stuff. They enjoy your guys' episodes. And I just go, like, you've seen the Zapruder film. They're like, yeah, I've seen the Zapruder film. I was like, did you know that's not the only film? And they're like, what? I was like, the president's coming to town. Of course, people are going to have their cameras and use them. And then it's like, it opens up. It's like, yeah. And it's like, same thing with Oswald. He gets a job at the book depository on October 16th. 4 days later, his daughter's born. And then a month later, around 17th or 19th, they published that the motorcade is going to be taking a route past Oswald's work. And then Kennedy's killed on the 22nd. Like, he got a job there way before. So either that plan had been cooking in the pot for a very long time and Oswald was in on it, or he wasn't. And I go, these are just things that are suspicious. At any moment, they could have shot him at his podium and they didn't. I'm like, that's like, you don't need to go anything more from there. Just show people, look at this. And then if they question it, it's like what Joe said, then you're a conspiracy theorist, because now you're starting to see it's like critical thinking is now getting mixed in with conspiracy talk.
Well, those facts that you named again probably point to a larger conspiracy. The CIA didn't have the kind of influence to put Oswald in that building. D.H. Byrd, is the guy that owned the building. Look at D.H. Byrd's connections, and they are everywhere. They're, the oil people in Texas, with Johnson, with Curtis LeMay, on and on and on. There's like 1 degree of separation between Lee Harvey Oswald and some of the most suspicious people in the United States associated with the JFK assassination. If you just use the interconnecting link of D.H. Byrd, he's the guy who owned the building where Oswald was installed. Okay, so who can put him there? Who controls that scene?
Or who got him the interview was Ruth Payne.
Post-assassination, rogue CIA agents could not manipulate the evidence. Rogue CIA agents could not manipulate the autopsy. You've got to have a broader spectrum of power than just a few rogue people, by the nature of the setup beforehand, by the nature of the cover-up afterwards. It's bigger than that. And I know that's by making that kind of statement, that automatically puts you into the, what was it Posner said one time, everybody but the kitchen sink theory. You're in that area of vast conspiracy. Well, maybe we are.
Well, I agree with that.
Well, there are other, maybe not in terms of numbers of people.
I agree with that, though. I'm not disagreeing on that. I believe it was a giant orchestrated thing. But if we talk about someone putting Oswald in that book depository building, could have just been happening. It could have been any location, and then maybe the route would have been different than just going by the book depository building.
Well, we don't need to necessarily go into this, but since we know that there was a Florida plot and there was a Chicago plot, then there were plans to do it in other locations. So
other defectors.
It could have been, they it was just the next option, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. So like when you're looking at
option.
Yeah.
Who knows, maybe they had, there's some speculation that if they hadn't got him at the Dealey, they may have got him at the trademark. I don't have done a lot of work on that. I don't know if you have, Joe, but
I haven't, but that's certainly something that more than one person has talked about, that's a possibility. But I would look at it. Let's take a totally different situation, right? Are you guys familiar with Charlie Wilson's War, the book about the arming of the
Mujahideen? The movie. I did not read the book.
Yeah, they made a picture out of it, which is, it's okay. But just the broader outlines of it, Charlie Wilson is getting involved with a right-wing woman who is able to get a lot of money together to help fund the Mujahideen's war against the Russians in Afghanistan, right? So at one level, there's that story, but there's also the fact that Zbigniew Brzezinski cooked that thing up, and he admitted that he did. He gave an interview with the Nouvel Observateur like 20 years later, because this is after 9/11, and they asked him the question, like, are you concerned now because these guys ended up knocking down the Twin Towers? And Brzezinski says, no. Like, what's a bunch of stirred up Muslims against us giving the Russians their Vietnam, right? So what I'm saying is that there are several people in this structure that are involved in this thing. We are going to arm the Mujahideen to battle against the Russians and give them their Vietnam, right? And some of those people are crazy wingnut right wingers from Texas, but there is a governmental part of this that is above that is directing our foreign policy in essence, but they're able to funnel it through these channels. And I think
Very
that
interesting
is
comparison, man. I had not looked at it, but it does have some parallels to maybe how it went down in Dallas. Yeah. Although, obviously the assassination of the president is a much bigger deal than funding, the Taliban
funding,
or in the Middle
funding
East.
terrorists is what we do.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you look at, I told you, we looked at this at the beginning of this session where I talked about my conference, and I mentioned that we were looking at different political assassinations of the 1960s. And I do think that there's the commonality would be is that the intelligence community, I believe, felt like they could do these things with impunity. They felt, or elements of it, that they would not be held accountable, that they could silence people that they saw as a threat to their agenda, and they did. And if Malcolm X was that, so be it. If Bobby Kennedy was a threat to the advent of the Vietnam War or the continuation of the Vietnam War, Martin Luther King, same thing. They were just enemies of the state to be eliminated, and they had the power to do it. Now, who is that they? That's a complicated, maybe not the same answer for the same assassination, yet still you have to see elements of the intelligence community and the power structure in America, the inside, outside the government that made these things happen. To what degree or structure, I don't know, but I just feel like you have to look at it that way.
I'm agreeing with you, but I'm also just saying we keep going back to that who did it thing. And I'm like, I mean, you can see one name I could just point out right out of the gate is Hoover. His name pops up everywhere, not only in JFK's assassination, you see him in the MLK assassination. I mean, his FBI, I'm pretty sure, is the one that forged a fake death threat from Martin Luther King. So now you have manipulation, but the cover up is the big thing. That's the prime example. Their involvement, whether they were the ones that initially orchestrated the plot or did any of that, they were part of the cover up. So they're involved in some aspect. Now, did they use the organized crime aspect when it comes to like the assassination attempts on Castro? Plausible deniability. We weren't involved because everything traces back to the mob. It doesn't matter who you would say, if it was General Walker, if you would say it was this, it all ends up going back to the intelligence agencies. And then you start wondering, the intelligence agency, what do they label a security risk? Well, they labeled LSD interrogations. They labeled mail intercepts. They labeled a bunch of things that make them look bad. And then you start noticing embarrassing the agency. That's a 21 document, or a 2021 document that was released about Garrison's investigation when they were talking about Garrison's attempts to embarrass the agency. The government's supposed to work for us, and they're looking at you like a problem. That's not good, because we know what they do with problems, and we've seen it with other foreign leaders. I mean, Castro was labeled a security risk, or Castro was labeled a national security issue. Fred Hampton was labeled a national security issue. Whether it was Hoover that deemed that, you start seeing this with local people that are just speaking up. And look at the times of Dallas back then. What was Kennedy doing with civil rights? What was Kennedy doing with the FDA? You start noticing a lot of things are, you could say wouldn't be good for business, but I would say it's just not, it's looking soft. It's looking soft on communism, understanding what that fear of communism is in some aspects. And also look what the structural system that's set in place. You can say right wing. I understand that, but I want to try and find common ground because people who might be right wing would hear that and be like, I didn't do that. And that's not me. Well, that's not the right wing of today. It's the right wing of back then. We can easily say,
Yeah, you're talking. You have to be careful there. When I speak of right wing extremists, I think that I see John Birchers, KKK, Southern Freemasons, some of the fanatical cold warriors inside the Joint Chief and the C. You're talking about a wholly different group than maybe what you see. Although you see elements of right-wing extremism of those who invaded the Capitol on January 6th, the Oath Keepers and those people, but they were more of a ground level operation. The problem, I think, in 1963 is some of these right-wing extremists and radicals held some of the highest positions in America, inside the, you mentioned General Walker, Curtis LeMay. I mean, people inside the CIA. These people had extreme views about the Cold War, about maybe not just ending the Cold War, which Kennedy wanted to do, but maybe start World War III. And they wanted to carry these things. You look at Operation Northwoods. They wanted to carry these things out. And so it's more about a power structure that was radical. I feel like if you want to look at have answers to assassinations and who would be willing to commit themselves to conspire, you have to have somebody that is radical. That means they are willing to commit to violence to achieve their ends. I've seen a document on a counterintelligence operation called Axie. I think maybe Joe might have heard of them a little bit. As people have been scrutinizing lately, as they were interconnected with the CIA. And I've seen documents. These guys were radical. They were dealing with Castro too. They openly put on a document in a memorandum from the United States military. What do we want to do about Castro? Assassinate him or kidnap him? It's right there on the document. There was no nuance about it. Here's what we need to do. Those are the people you need to look for when you're looking for the conspirators. Look for the people that are willing to commit to something radical, that are extreme enough to go that far. That's just if you're looking for the characters behind these things.
No, I agree, because even with Alan Dulles, I mean, look at what Alan Dulles did with a bunch of the horrible things that he was doing. He didn't see it that way. He looked at it as like being a patriot. I have to do the things that most Americans won't.
Exactly.
So, I mean, but
patriotic act, no question.
It's like trusting the forensic evidence, though. It's like if you start going, we don't need to look at witnesses because witness testimonies are they're so flimsy. Nobody can really recollect unless they've had war experience, which is true. I've talked to memory experts on my show. But then if you look at the forensic evidence, well, who the hell's doing the collecting of the forensic evidence? I mean, for God's sakes, Arlen Specter built his whole career on a single bullet theory. And I'm sure he must have saw that the hole was definitely not located where he pinpointed it to be. And we ended up finding out that later. But it's also, is this a young lawyer who's got, a path to take, whether he's got to lie and, get everything he wants, basically doesn't have to worry about finding a job or anything like that.
They did put some pressure on him. I know Jim Mars tells that story a lot, or used to. Obviously Jim no longer with us, about how, they were basically confronted with the whole thing about James Tague. They thought they had an open shut case, 3 shots, one throat wound, one head wound, one Conley, and then James Tague pops up, and they got to figure out, how are we going to add this into the equation? We got a potential 4th shot. Well, no, we don't, because we don't get a 4th shot. So Arlen, go into that room, watch that movie, and don't come out here until you find a way to make it all work. And so Specter concocts a freaky, impossible theory that nobody inside the Warren Commission, I believe, really even wanted or agreed with. They just needed a fallback position, and that was it, or a default position, the single bullet theory. I mean, and so here we are, 60 years later, still having to deal with it.
Yeah. Breach of Trust is a good book on the creation of the Warren Commission. It has some good Spectre stuff in it. But yeah, you're talking about these radicals, which, Alan Dulles is maybe a quiet radical in that sense, because Alan Dulles thinks he's justified all the time because he's doing this stuff for the benefit of the United States in his view. So when we overthrow Mossadegh in 53 and he's the guy who draws up those plans, that's he's committing to American foreign policy. Our foreign policy is to get rid of that guy. And he just applies the same thing, or the actors who are involved in this stuff apply those same standards to domestic operatives. It's like, we got to get rid of this person. This person is dangerous. Martin Luther King, he's out there, he's doing wild stuff. We got to get rid of him. He's gonna, yeah. So yeah, these people, and Curtis LeMay is a perfect example. He wants to go to war immediately with the Russians, and the reason he wants to do that is because in his mind, we have numerical superiority with nuclear weapons. We are going to go to war with the communists at some point, so let's do it now because we have.
LeMay, if you look at LeMay's record going back to World War II, I mean, deaths and casualties weren't important. I mean, he's the guy that promoted the firebombing. People talk about whether we should have dropped the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but let's face it, under LeMay, the United States Air Force at the end of World War II created about 20 Hiroshimas and Nagasaki's with their firebombing of civilian cities across Japan. Where we were in the middle of a war, a war that was going to be, that all lines had become blurred. The Japanese were as responsible for that as anybody in terms of their brutality, and we felt tit for tat. I understand, but LeMay proved that in World War II that how many people died or how they died didn't matter to him, and that showed in the 1960s when, hey, we can win. Hey, no matter that maybe 100 million people might die and the planet might become a cinder, but we'll win. I think there's it shows you where he was at.
I agree with Peter Kuznick on that, which is that he wrote Untold History of the U.S. with Oliver Stone, and he said that we already won. That what that bombing was for Russia. It was a message to Russia.
There might be truth to that. I mean, they might have been part of that. Might be sending the message to the Russians of what we have. I mean, we could delve into that. The fact that we withheld the promise of, not prosecuting the emperor until after we dropped the bombs, which is what the Japanese were. I can set part, but also you think there was also a radical element inside the Japanese military machine that may well not have surrendered under any terms other than bombing the shit out of them anyway. In fact, some of them wanted to keep on fighting even after bombs were dropped. So I don't know. I'm a little bit,
again,
I'm just a little bit nuanced about that, in my opinion, about
that's fine. But what I'm saying is, again, we get lost in the weeds on this one again, which is this the most simplest thing ever is trying to get the public onto the idea of the conspiracy part. If you say media manipulation, people go, well, I don't trust the media today anyway. It's like, well, there was media manipulation as in not talking to witnesses like they were supposed to be doing, or a normal journalist would be doing. We know that the CIA invades campuses today, influences trillions of dollars for research studies and a bunch of different stuff, even recruiting spies. I've had guests on my show talk about this. But then it comes into your idea. Just ask people their preconceived notions. Any movie that you list that has an FBI agent, they come on and they're basically badasses on screen. Well, did you know J. Edgar Hoover said that the FBI could shoot as much as they want, but the bad guy can only shoot a couple of times? He was distorting their image from back in the 60s, back in the 50s. You starting there and just start showing it's like, this isn't like some just grand conspiracy that comes out of the JFK assassination. There's media manipulation that's been happening way before that. And if we talk about some of those radicals, who were those radicals hanging out with months before the assassination? Who did they normally frequently call or talk to? Look around. Big oil companies. I mean, you can really start kind of seeing where the capitalist system, I mean, at a raw deal of it. Now it's more big tech, but I think that's very easy to get people into that kind of idea of listening to more about this stuff. But even with all the documents I have and stuff I've been putting together for a separate thing, is like there's so much there where there are Cubans at the airport that day, Oswald meeting with, and it's like everyone's doing their very own independent investigations. I'm not talking about researchers. I'm talking about people in the government that have their own theories and perspectives. And I just picture Allen Dulles or Hoover or someone going, hey, everyone, write up a thing you think happened. And then everyone just starts writing, and they just shoved it all in there, because when you enter the documents, it's so much that you have to back away. And that's like the hardest thing, where it's like, how can we just get to the basic message of like this, here's some weird things. And then you just show them, like, why would you have 3 shell casings on the ground and have one in your rifle if the president's head blew off? Why would you be reloading? It doesn't make sense. So that's simple stuff you just tell the public and you're hooked.
Right. I mean, you can take, I always tell my class, I'll take about 20 minutes and point out some things that happened in Dallas that day that make you understand that the idea that one person acted alone, Lee Harvey Oswald, is impossible. And if you want to disagree with me, walk out of the class after I'm done here. And I haven't anybody walk out yet. But if you just look at things, you have a series of improbabilities in Dallas that add up to impossibility. Whether it's the witnesses, whether it's the single bullet theory, whether it's what we see in what may have well have been, but still has some merit in my mind, a doctored Zapruder film. There's too much to ignore, and you just, that's why it hasn't gone away. And again, though, you're talking about the cover up. I keep coming back to that, like, who had the power to make these things happen afterwards? Who had the connections? Because you're right, Hoover's right in the middle of it. Hoover's closing things down. There's no question about it. I mean,
what agency had the power to, when they were trying to use the plots to assassinate Castro, to deliver rifles that were, if I'm not mistaken, it was an Italian carbine, or was it a 3.75, the exact one that was found in the book depository building before it was a Mannlicher Carcano. And that's in the document of the assassination plots on Castro. They have a bunch of things delivered. They have a whole section that's labeled rifles. I just had it before I closed out my windows.
It was a Carcano. I'm not a gun guy, so I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I have read that it's not even a Mannlicher Carcano. It's called a Carcano, and it was a carbine, because that's what Oswald actually ordered, was a carbine, a short rifle, but he ends up getting a long rifle. But yes, there's a Mauser that was identified, and also a British Lee Enfield that was. There's also documents to that effect. So there's questions about even what rifle they discovered. It only becomes a Carcano after it's revealed that that's the kind of gun that Alec Heidel allegedly ordered.
So did they find one on the roof?
Everything is just kind of funneled into immediate. Well, the circulation. One of the things the new documents have told us is that there was this group speak going on. It wasn't. For a long time, we went with the idea, that Nick Katzenbach was the Assistant Secretary of State that under JFK, then LBJ, and he's made the famous statement about the public must be satisfied that Oswald acted alone and there were no other Confederates with him. Well, the new documents indicate he's not the only one saying that. Hoover was circulating that statement. Ed Taker always mentions that Bill Moyers, the young aide for LBJ, was using the same line. This became circulated within hours after the assassination. The public must be satisfied that Oswald acted alone. At the very time where we know, the one of the most important documents that came out in 1993 out of the LBJ library, where, Oswald's not even dead yet. And Hoover's talking to Johnson saying, hey, the guy we got in jail isn't the same guy that was down there in Mexico City. I mean, so right then and there, you've got two people, Hoover and Johnson, who knew, unless they're stupid, or let's be naive and think they weren't involved at all. I think they had some knowledge, but let's just say they're totally naive and don't know shit about this. But here you go. You mean that guy in jail that we got in jail that supposedly killed the president was being impersonated in Mexico City the den of spies in the world, and there's nothing going on here. They knew, and yet they're still go ahead with this circulation, this narrative that the public must be satisfied with Oswald acting alone. Right there, it tells me those guys are all in on the cover up, because they know 48 hours after this that Oswald's not just a lone nut, if they didn't already. I mean, that's
well, one of my you bring up one of my favorite documents is the one that's to Hoover, that's saying that someone is using Oswald's identity to buy guns in Mexico, because that is like, I want to say that's 1960,
60,
it's
61,
2 or 3 years.
Yeah, he had information that somebody was using Oswald's name.
And mind you, they're impersonating a 22-year-old kid to buy guns. And there's no reason for that to even be in the record unless, and this is what I would argue, is that Hoover is putting this into the record. He wants it known that there's something about this kid, this Oswald, because otherwise, why are they telling him about this? Like, this is all insane. And yet it's in the record 2 years before the assassination. So Oswald cannot be a nobody.
Well, the level of power necessary to create this scenario. I mean, I always keep coming back to, because I always try to do a lot of then and now with my history classes and try to make some connections and make this stuff come alive a little bit. And I think that's the best way to do it, if you can find parallels to the then and the now. And I keep going back to that statement that General Milley from the Joint Chiefs in the intervening period after the 2020 election, when he was concerned that something might go down, there might be another coup d'etat, that Trump or some folks might try to steal the election. And he made this statement, I put in my article, he says, he said, you can't effing get away with it. You can't do this without the military, the CIA, and the FBI. And I was going to say this in Dallas, and I forgot, I ran out of time. I'd like to get General Milley in a bar somewhere and say, look, just off the record, when you made that statement, were you talking about Dallas? Or were you just, what do you really believe in your heart when you made that statement about what is necessary for a coup d'etat and who has to be a part of it? Were you talking about past history? Where did you come up with that statement? I mean, I would love to talk to that guy about that. But anyway, that's something that maybe Milley is right. What's required to conduct a coup d'etat? It has to be an inside job.
Well, who had power over Harvey?
Yeah. Who could order Harvey around? I mean, who could get Harvey the money? Or whoever else might have been involved with this?
Well, Harvey had connections with, or Harvey would meet with Roselli. So then you have there, and then Roselli was the middleman between Giancana and Trafficante. So then we didn't even mention
that connection that Harvey had.
I just was looking through one of the documents about.
Harvey, in fact, and I've said this before, that there's a document that suggests that a chronology of the CIA's relationship with John Roselli, where they basically go point by point in their connection to John Roselli, starting with Mayhew and the whole works. And they get to 1962, and John Roselli takes over as case officer, and in the document it says, we do not know what happened. This was May 62 to 63 in regards to Roselli and Harvey from that point on. Once Roselli took over, the CIA was either saying, we don't know what the hell they were doing, or we don't want to put it on this document. So that, to me, that makes Roselli pretty important as well. I mean, makes Harvey pretty important in all this, I think.
Do you think that it could have been possible that Harvey would have been smart enough to knock off Roselli and make it look like a mob hit, like chopping him up and putting him in a barrel, rather than Trafficante doing that?
I have no evidence of that, but my guess is that wasn't I don't think the mob killed Roselli. I think that was a CIA hit, but I don't know, Joe, what do you think? But that's just pure speculation on my part.
It is pure speculation. And we were talking about this, I think, right before we got on, and I mentioned that, typically the CIA doesn't chop up people and put them in barrels that we know of.
Yeah, that one was like,
but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And one of the things that this is all this conversation is revealing is how difficult it is to communicate this to the general public, because it's a hall of mirrors to start off with, and then every operation is like this. You've got all of these tendrils going in every direction to all of these different connections, and you're trying to trace them all to figure out who is the most important party. And so in some sense, it's kind of I've kind of eschewed that to some extent, because I feel like all the tendrils end up leading to the same place. What John Judge used to say is, you got the mafia, you get the CIA, the palm is the Pentagon. And I say that's where all of these connections are happening. And when you're wanting to do a coup, what you need is the Joint Chiefs. And that was always his stance, is that the Joint Chiefs are the one running this thing, and that makes a certain amount of sense to me.
Yeah, that's what Milley said. Milley was point blank, 60 years later, says the same thing. Can't pull it off without us. You're not going to pull it off without us. So can we presume that whoever the folks that did Dallas knew that they're going to have some powerful people on the inside, whether that be the Joint Chiefs, or elements of it? Yeah, I agree. I think it's got to be part of the equation.
And Kennedy knows. I mean, Kennedy, he takes away planning after the Bay of Pigs, right? Fires Dulles, fires Richard. I just lost his name.
Cabell.
Anyway, yeah, and he says, okay, you know what? You guys are nuts. I'm going to give planning to the Joint Chiefs. And what does Lemnitzer do? He comes up with Northwoods, where they're going to shoot John Glenn at.
Yep.
Which Kennedy's got to be like, I'm surrounded by lunatics. Like, these guys are,
He was surrounded by lunatics. I mean, that is the issue, that Cold War extremism had risen to such a level that it became life or death. Us against them, and the guy in the White House is in the way. So
the real dangers is when those powers don't get checked, when those covert capabilities are able to have free range. I mean, the amount of creativity that was put into some of those assassination attempts on Castro. I mean, Giancana said he came up with the poison pills, but I can tell you one thing: an exploding seashell is not a mob hit. That's an intelligence information thing. Doing things when it comes to a character assassination of trying to make Castro's beard fall out. I mean, that's not a mob thing. A mob thing would have been get someone close beside him and just have him take him out, and take the arrest or get killed in the process of it, maybe not let them know. But there's those weird connections. And then you look at who are some of the people.
There was absolutely no scrutiny on what the intelligence apparatus in the United States could do by the early 1960s. They had, until Kennedy came along, they had carte blanche. There's nothing. They had an unlimited budget, no oversight. They could do whatever they want. You're right. And I teach this in my we just finished up in my sociology class, and we talked about how, when we talk about deviant behavior, and that when there is no consequences, no punishment, no consequences for deviant behavior, people will stretch their standards of deviance of what they do. And the CIA had a free run for so long, they could just keep getting worse, and nobody could question it. I mean, you mentioned MK Ultra, mind control. Hell, they're the CIA in the 19th. I've probably seen the thing about what was the CIA officer that jumped out the window, right?
That's Frank Olson.
Yeah, Frank Olson. They did this long series on here recently on Netflix.
Wormwood.
Well, they also apparently dropped an LSD cloud on a small French village, and a bunch of those folks went crazy and committed suicide. Where's the accountability? At what point do you say this is beyond anything stretch of morality.
What about Operation Midnight Climax, where they were dropping LSD into random freaking people's drinks, drugging Johns, or the Schriker
Yeah, I
incident?
mean, there was no scrutiny on what they were doing, where they were doing it, or how often they did it. And they kept stretching. Ultimately, they felt like they could, or at least elements of that group felt like that could include not just assassinating foreign leaders, but assassinating a president that was in the way. I mean, you need people to commit to a radical action. You need people with radical viewpoints, and they were certainly, some of those resided inside the Central Intelligence Agency, no question.
Well, even Hoover with his world police idea and involvement into Latin America as well too. Um, I think a lot of it gets stuck in what I would call like a little bit of the gunk, which is the kind of where people get lost, and that is with a lot of the documents. But that's also, I mean, the number like George de Montshield's a name that gets brought up, and I know people have this particular interest in, but that's like really narrowing it down if you're not interested in getting the public in on the discussion. And it's like if you really can hook people in, which is what people can already, I guess, agree with, which is that a certain race class has been affected throughout history in a very bad way. A simple example is the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. If you talk about COINTELPRO, I mean, I found out that they created a fake coloring book. Like what? I didn't know that, but people still don't know that.
They sent it to it because they had a lot of Jewish support, including people like Leonard Bernstein, who had used to have Panthers come over to the apartment, and so they would send this fake coloring book to some of the Jewish supporters, because the coloring book would be like radically violent. It would be like kill Whitey and all this stuff. And so they were trying to turn off the spigot of money to the Panthers.
So if you explain that to people, people will be more than likely to probably agree with that. But then it's even harder. Like when I had Joe on here in his past episode, I showed a heart attack gun. That sounds insane. But when you show it and you show the church committee showing it around, people are like, oh my God, it's real. And it's like, okay, so you can show them an extreme example, but just show them like, hey, like there's past history of this. There's insane stuff going on. And that's what happens when you don't solve something, or you don't get clarity on something like the Kennedy assassination or other events that the agency is doing.
Yeah. No, the history will, I think one of my fellow researchers didn't say history repeats itself. He says history will echo, though. I like that maybe the chances of something of a similar nature returning to us again. That's to me, the worst part of the whole Kennedy thing that I've been around for so long, that it's, I don't know if it's, I think it's not so much unsolved as unresolved, that, we have a good idea what happened in Dallas, those of us have paid enough attention, although I don't know if you can definitively bring a 100% level to know in a conspiracy like this of who exactly did what or we'll ever get there, but we have a good idea who they were, who had the motivation, the most likelihood, a whole lot of evidence that points in directions. But how do you get our institutions to come along? How do you get the public to come along? Those are the struggles, and again, I feel like, I hope I'm not being overly optimistic. I've spent quite a bit of time on the new documents that have come out. Of course, they have not released all. The current and former president have continued delays each of the last few years of more documents. But December 15th is a big day. There have been some indications, some reports that the CIA will release all the remaining documents. We will see about all that. I think Jefferson Morley's press conference last week, I think, was kind of a shot across the bow. I think he was trying to educate the public about what he thought he already knew. He couldn't really offer any documents, because what he's really trying to accomplish was to put pressure on the government to release those documents that he does think exists. Now, what will they tell us? I think there's a very good chance that, especially the documents associated with Joe Joelinides, will probably show us that, yeah, that there wasn't, that Oswald was involved with an intelligence operation, but that doesn't prove the Kennedy assassination necessarily was a conspiracy, but it doesn't look good. It moves the needle. We just got to keep moving the needle where we, like we mentioned earlier, where we got to force people like Posner to retreat, at least, take the limited hangout position. Maybe you can't stick your head in the sand anymore and say, well, Oswald was just a lone nut. Maybe we'll get there. Then that'll be the next step. Once people realize, no, Oswald was something more. And then you can no longer ignore the conspiracy angle.
One thing I found funny about the conference was when that guy got up and he started asking a bunch of questions. He literally wasn't asking a question. He was just talking about how like it's all a giant global conspiracy from like Israel or something, which I've only heard once on the show.
I can tell you all about that guy. He's just out there, man.
I've heard that once on my show before.
He shows up. I'm not going to mention his name. I don't want to, but he showed
There's
up.
always one.
Yeah, he's Joe knows who he is. He's a nut. And he just, he lives in DC, and he's all about showing how the Jews are behind everything. That's basically his deal.
I've heard it once before on my show, and I did not agree with it at all. It's so out in left field. And I think that's what happens. Sometimes you end up diving into this and people want to think it's like, and that's the first time I've ever heard of that out of the assassination, where halfway through I was like, wait, what's going on right now? Like I had to tune back in and be like, wait a minute. But what's important about what that conference did is I think it got the public discussion kind of going a little bit. And this is why I asked you about the conference. Like, did you see a better increase on the numbers or something? Because I was just hoping, like, I started seeing trending articles everywhere. And I was like, is that finally, turning the discussion? But then you got to realize, it is the anniversary. It's around the anniversary. How long is this talk going to last? Is the public going to fade back into the backdrop a little bit on this once we're in?
Generally does. I think that the anniversaries in Dallas tend to bring it back, and then things float to the surface where you do get some media attention, especially with these new documents. I think that's called attention, whether Biden will release the remainder or not. I think that could be a big deal. I really do. I think I've told my students that this could be a moment here that we're looking at in terms of if we're really interested. I mean,
I'll forgive them for COVID.
Joe, what are we looking at 60 years later? What are we looking to accomplish, Joe? Where are we at on this? We just want to.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things to make a couple of fairly cynical observations. The one thing that Republicans and Democrats in power have always managed to agree on is not releasing information about the Kennedy assassination, including even when we had Trump and now we have Biden, and they're both in total lockstep so far on that issue. And then the other thing I would say is that how incompetent is our government if they can't phony up some documents after 60 years, which I realize is a fairly cynical thing to say, but I'll believe it when I see it. Let's see what we got. Having said that, of course, the ARB released a ton of documents that were useful, and it did add to the picture, and a lot of great books emerged as a result of those documents. So I've got a little bit of hope that some of that stuff will get through. But I am aware that there is not going to be the document that says, Oswald did it, or Dulles did it, with the rifle in the conservatory. Like it's just not going to be that. It's always going to be stuff we're going to have to parse.
This might be speculation, but do you think that it could be possible that you would see maybe Oswald's name at the top of a document, then below it could be one of these secret programs that go on? And it might not even be connected at all, but it was just a way of saying that it is a national security thing that they cannot release, something like that could be kind of crucial, but it had something way more secret attached to it. I noticed that with diving before I spoke with Blakey, there's a lot of things, even with the assassination plots on Castro, JM Wave, Amlash Project. There's a bunch of stuff where it's like, that's going to be the stuff that's redacted most likely. And I feel like it's just a smart decision. If you know that, you got to release these files at some point, wouldn't you just put these together so you could hold on to those for as long as possible? Because you're not lying at that point. You're not just saying, oh, we can't, it's a security issue. You're just morphing the document.
What I think one thing I would like to say in regard to that specific thing is that
Tell me I'm wrong.
it is true that when you're looking at these documents, you don't, like, let's say you're looking at a redaction, right? And you might say, oh, well, that redaction has to do with the Kennedy assassination. It might not. That's right. It might have nothing to do with it. So you have to look at the context, but you're never going to get a full picture just from a document, because you've got to then make an inference about that document. Does this say what I think it says? Because there's plenty of documents that have been released over the last 60 years, 59 years, that researchers argue about to this day. Like, is this a phony document? Is this not a phony document? Because you do have to make these inferences. I mean, it's,
you do.
it's complicated.
The one of the documents that I've looked at, and I've really kind of in the last 5 years been focusing on the ones that have been declassified. We downloaded all those out of the National Archives and been looking at them. And then I think the important thing is you try to build a narrative around what you see. In other words, okay, why is this important? Like I mentioned earlier, the small counterintelligence outfit Axie out of the United States military who openly advocated the assassination or kidnapping of Castro. That, to me, that's more than just a document that says that's where these people were at. That makes them suspicious. You have to be able to take A and go to B with these documents. You just can't say, "Well, there it is. That proves something." I mean, we found a document where Max Taylor basically, kind of keeping in line with John Newman, who, by the way, is going to be, I believe, is going to probably be coming to our next thing in Memphis, because he's got a new book coming out on King. But he wrote JFK in Vietnam, and he postulated this whole storyline about how Kennedy's intention to get out of Vietnam, withdraw troops, how he's being lied to by the military. They were giving him false information about the course of the war, trying to keep him engaged. The whole storyline. Well, there was a document that came out in February of '64 where Max Taylor, 3 months after JFK's dead, says we need to stop sending information to the president of the United States of uncertain validity. In other words, analyze that. You guys are saying that basically the last president was being fed lies. And now we got to make sure you're getting the true intelligence, how it's really going in Vietnam after JFK's dead. But when JFK's alive, it's okay for him to feed false information. Now it's not. That's how I read that. That's how I build a narrative around something to make it what I believe to be very important. That's what you need to do when we look at these things and we dig into them. You have to apply narratives to them. You have to become insightful. They're just not things. Well, maybe the Northwoods thing, but that just kind of jumps out at you. Northwoods needed no narrative, right? When Northwoods just says these people are insane, they're trying to do anything, including lie, cheat, start violent provocation, kill Americans in order to start a war with Castro. But most of this stuff we look at, it's more nuanced than that.
Well, that's even with some of the points of contingency, I would say, between the researchers, is some people believe that Northwoods isn't a real document, and some people believe that the Castro assassination attempts aren't a real document. And I'm sitting here like, there's way too much documentation on the Castro assassination plots. I think there's only 8 that are really written down. I know there's a guy who wrote a book around like 600 or something assassination attempts. But I mean, that's like, why would you admit to that or just make a fake document about that? It makes it sound horrible.
I am new to this whole thing that Northwoods is not a real document. I just saw this, like, I don't know, less than a month ago, I think. But the guy who was talking about that was basically saying that Banford was using that document to direct attention away from Israel. And so I was like, oh, okay, he's one of these guys. He's one of, there's always these guys. We're always
that sounds like our guy that was Gollman guy I just mentioned who was at the concert.
Yeah, said don't say his name.
You guys are hiding the truth. Yeah.
That's just okay. That's ridiculous. I mean, I don't know how anything could be more documented than that document. You know, in terms of Northwoods, I mean, it's very clear, you know. But anyway, yeah, I think when we look at the new documents and with the stuff we've looked at in recent years that's come out since 2017, there have been significant things, but you have to think the most significant things are still remain, you know, on the other side of it. We haven't seen them yet, but we'll see. Maybe.
I'm surprised the Warren Commission with the number of things that they put in their volumes that weren't in the official report, because they knew people weren't going to go read the whole volumes, but they buried a lot of people in there, like testimonies and things of that sort. I was like, you know what? You had the whole, people didn't know all the people you were interviewing. You could have easily just took in their interview and then thrown it the hell out, but you decided just to bury it in there like you wanted to get caught.
Well, that apparently did happen, and a lot of interviews were apparently changed according to the people who did the interview. But yeah, but I think that goes back to a point. I think we talked about this a little bit, that because the institution is all leading in one direction, doesn't mean that every individual is also on board with that. You know, there's a lot of people working for the FBI who are just doing their jobs, and they're just going in and going, okay, I'm going to take this interview, and they don't realize necessarily that this interview gives the lie to some other part of the official story. So I think that's where some of this comes from. And that's what we're looking for in these documents, is evidence against interest, that there are individuals who are working who are not necessarily being told what to do at every step, because none of this stuff is monolithic. The
Yeah,
institution has a point.
I mean, a lot of things that happened before and after Dallas, not, you know, like, you know, my good friend Ed Tatro, you know, who's focused a lot on the Texas end of things, talks a lot about how, you know, who ordered off the bubble top, and it was probably Bill Moyers. Okay, he was still alive, right? And you know, obviously PBS, Bill Moyers, he was a young operative for Lyndon Johnson. But I'm not going to sit here and think that, you know, because Moyers ordered the damn bubble top off, quote unquote, did he really know what was going on, or was he just told to do something? I tend to think the latter. I tend to think that, you know, my boss told me to get the bubble top off the car, get the bubble top off the car.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And who the hell was washing out the car not even like an hour after Kennedy's had parked
Yeah.
them? So
Yeah, probably somebody following orders.
scrub the evidence. It's just like, I mean, I'm not even an investigator, but that's the dumbest thing ever. Then repairing the car like ASAP right after that happened, for what? He's flying
And
on
I
Air
think
Force
that's a
One.
lot of, hey, I'm just saying that's a whole lot of Lyndon Johnson there.
I know.
Johnson's one that ordered that limo refurbished.
Well, when Joe was on my show, I played a clip of Hoover and Johnson talking, and they were talking about Ruby wanting to be taken to DC to take this polygraph test. And he goes, "Do you trust the polygraph test?" And Hoover's like, "No, I don't trust it a damn bit. What it is." And he like broke it down in a way. And I go, "Stop. The Innocence Project exposed that in like 2014 or 2013 or something." So maybe people were telling the truth because they thought they were going to find out, or they just manipulated the results to wrongfully imprison people like the Innocence Project exposed. But back then they fucking knew it. And that's the thing, is like they probably knew that for a very long time. And it was a lie. It was to be able to, how many people were wrongfully sent to the chair? How many people were wrongfully imprisoned later? All because of this lie. And that's like trying to show people that. It's like, to me, that's a giant breakthrough. That's very incriminating on any parts of the government aspect of things. But it's also these agencies. They don't communicate with each other. They don't do anything. I mean, I think Jim had it in his film with the 3 recreations of how the shots were fired. The CIA was the one that got a front shot. Everyone else was all in the back. And it was like, so, I mean, that's the best part about them not communicating, is that this whole aspect of like, they're all over the board, which makes you really look at like the whole thing as a plan and realize that your government all has different mindsets and they don't communicate with each other. Actually, they withhold stuff from each other. I mean, I would ask you guys this just from a personal point of view. Don't you think it's ridiculous that they thought the best thing to do to get a clear answer that no one would question would to be get a blue ribbon committee of members with really good resumes and really good experience to just make an investigation, not even with the goal of investigating the president's death, but just having Lee Harvey Oswald with no doubts about it. I mean, as a public, they accepted that because like, well, these guys are all esteemed credits. They'll do their job correct.
Well, Earl Warren was the key. That they needed Earl Warren because he had so much credibility.
Yeah, and I always recall growing up when I was, my younger days, my father, who was a good, honest, good old school Republican, always said, he goes, if Gerald Ford said that's what happened, that's good enough for me. So maybe a lot of the public just looked at the names on the list and didn't question the details, didn't dig in. If I'll believe my government. You had a lot of more folks who were naive about trusting government in those days. And if even though if it didn't add up or make sense, there must be an answer. There must be a reason. Maybe there is something there we probably shouldn't know for 75 years. Maybe that's something that is for the betterment of everybody. I mean, they just, a lot of folks just fell in line with that based upon, like you said, the bona fides of the individuals, starting with Earl Warren, who were placed at the top of this so-called investigation.
I mean, Jim Garrison. Garrison writes about that in his book. He didn't want this. Like, he didn't want to find this. And even when the FBI rejected the witness that he threw, and they held a press conference to explain how wrong Garrison was to send this person to him, he thought it was weird, but he didn't immediately then investigate the case because he accepted basically the structure.
Exactly. There was this level of acceptance. And I talk about this in my class a lot. I mean, is that good? The place where America was at then, as opposed to where we are now, is so different. I'm not sure if either side's a great position or what. Yeah, it was great in some respects that Americans trusted their government prior to 1963 on such a higher level, but maybe it's not either. Maybe we were too naive. Then on the other hand, now you've got Americans that simply, on an average basis, won't participate in democracy because they just think, all government is bad. I don't trust anybody in government. I don't trust anything I read in the news. I don't trust anything on the networks. Well, that's bullshit too. You can't, you have to, you can't stick in your head in the sand either way on this. You got to have a public that's questions. Yeah, we want to have we want to have confidence in our institutions, and holding those folks within those institutions makes them accountable, allows the trust. But at the same time, we don't want to become so skeptical, like so much of our public is today, that they don't believe anything, or they just believe what they read on Facebook.
I believe in a deep state.
Kind of at. I mean,
I believe in a deep state, and I believe the deep state's capitalism. But if I ask you, why doesn't an independent win? And usually the answer I get is, oh, they'll never win. And it's always been this left, right, type of agenda, this red versus blue mentality. That's why I think it's a fucking joke.
Well, there's actually, so that's a different argument, because the thing that is distinguished about the American Republic is that in other democracies, they have parliamentary systems. So we have first past the post. That's why an independent can't win, because essentially you have to be in the party to win, because otherwise you can't get money. And if you don't get a majority of the vote, you're not getting in.
So how do
we don't have parliamentary representation.
How do I expect to not consider it a joke when it's just going to be the right side or the left side, and either none of them do anything?
Work within the system. So here's the thing though, right? If you're not willing to work within the system, then you're talking about a revolution, and that has problems of its own.
I'm not for the whole libertarian mindset of destruction of government. I think the government's needed. I'm a patriot at heart, but I just don't think you have good actors in your government. And I think what the real issue is that we are that entanglement. And a lot of that is the big capitalist market. It's that business interests. It's that whatever decisions that they want to do and whatever power
Yeah,
they
I
feel like they
mean,
need to be involved
with,
in.
without getting too deep or political, but let's face it, with the Citizens United decision about a decade ago by the Supreme Court, the amount of money flowing, I mean, it's mind boggling, the amount of money that just keeps multiplying exponentially with every election cycle. I don't know where it all comes from, but a lot of Americans donate money that they're interested and passionate about, and that's great. There's a lot of small donors, but the amount of corporate money flowing into our system, dark money without accountability, unless we get that removed, you're going to have that level of influence in our democracy that we can't escape from. And that's a point of damage in terms of our democracy if we indeed have one, the semblance of democracy that we have.
Yeah. The analysis in the Yankee and Cowboy War still works. The actors are slightly different. Now you have like with dark money, tech companies versus oil companies fighting over who they want to get elected. But it's very far removed from you or I or any other individual citizen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, especially probably in terms of selection of candidates or who has the opportunity to run. You literally need to have millions of dollars to even think about walking even into a Senate race, not let alone the presidency of the United States these days. Then you need hundreds of millions of dollars.
Just one candidate that doesn't have a weird background would be nice, like no skull and bones connections or anything like that would be freaking fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we're at, where we live. I mean, but it'd be nice if we could get at least some, see some things happen that would say, okay, that might garner our trust a little more, or maybe we should get involved. Well, don't just sit this thing out. It may not be perfect. It's far from it. And yeah, power usually dictates, but if the individual American citizen or the individual young voter who just says, screw it, they're all corrupt, both parties suck, I don't want anything to do with this, they're just allowing the few to be more powerful by not engaging in whatsoever. I mean, that's the rule of might, I guess, but I guess that's where we're at. I mean,
but plays into their interests. I mean, try to do what you can. Try to resist wherever you can.
Exactly.
Fight for the things that
sometimes
it
is in the ballot box. Sometimes there are opportunities to make a difference by your vote. You may not think it, but sometimes there are. I mean,
I'm gonna throw paint on a Leonardo da Vinci painting.
That was yeah. What was that? I don't even know what that was.
I know.
Oh man,
it's like you could do way better things with that.
Whatever your point was, you're not making it. You're not reaching me, man.
Gentlemen, seriously, thank you so much for joining me back on my podcast, and I enjoy talking with you guys. And appreciate all the help with trying to understand the assassination as well too, and other aspects of deep politics, I would say. Yeah, that's what it is. That's what you guys are a part of.
Thanks for having me. And Joe, guys, we got potentially something in April in Memphis. Maybe you guys might be interested in what's going on there. But
I was thinking about the last time I was in Memphis was for the 40th anniversary with COPA and
you know what, Joe? I was there too. There were only like about 5 people there. It must have been you, me, and Mal Hyman.
Yeah, I was
there too.
I was the guy filming it. Yeah, when Judge Joe Brown was talking and all that. Yeah, and Jerry Ray.
Because remember, there were only like 5 people there, right? And I said, yeah. Well, hopefully there'll be this time around. We'll have more than 5 people there, but
I hope so.
We'll try a little harder.
Memphis is difficult. I mean, it's we talked to a lot of people about some of the internal problems they're having, and we kind of got an answer as to why so few people showed up. But it was still pretty cool. We did the march, went to the Lorraine, went to the National Civil Rights Museum, and just like the Dealey Plaza, you can't get to the window, right? They've got like a window box thing, a glass enclosure, so you can't really get to the window to see what the deal is, because nobody wants to, like the old Bill Hicks joke. They don't want everybody going up and going, no way, that can't end, no way. Same thing with MLK, but yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad that, I mean, there's been so little interest comparatively in MLK and Malcolm, that I'm always excited when somebody's doing something with that.
Well, great.
Where can people find you guys?
Thanks again.
Where can people find you guys? You guys got to promote your links before you go.
Oh yeah, Joe Green, JFK.
Okay, so Joe Green, JFK. David,
Yeah,
where can they find you?
JFK Historical Group.
Okay, JFK Historical Group. I'm going to link it in the description. Thanks again, guys, and thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.